Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished colleagues, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, participants joining us from across the regions. Thank you very much for joining. I am Dr. Tariq Aziz from University of Agriculture, Faisalabad, and a regional director of International Nitrogen Initiative and the member from Global Partnership on Nutrient Management Steering Committee. So is both the engine of our food system and one of the most overlooked environmental challenges of our time. So over the past century, reactive nitrogen has enabled us to feed billions. Yet today, more than half of the nitrogen we use is lost to the environment. So driving air pollution, degrading our water, accelerating biodiversity loss, and contributing significantly to climate change. So before I go further, I would like to acknowledge that today, 22nd of May, is the Global Day of Biodiversity. So this is very great. Biodiversity is the fabric of life that sustain us from the soils beneath our feet to oceans that surround us. So nitrogen pollution is one of the top 5 drivers of biodiversity loss globally. Europe stands at the critical intersection in this journey. It's a global leader in science, policy, innovation, and environmental governance, with ambitious networks such as the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork policy strategy. So at the same time, it faces complex realities like highly interconnected food systems, dependence on imported nitrogen through fertilizers and feed, and increasing vulnerability to global disruptions and geopolitical shocks like the war. This makes Europe not only a region of challenges, but also a laboratory of solutions for sustainable nitrogen management. Today's webinar, part of the GPNM and INI joint webinar series, brings together leading experts to reflect on this journey, connecting policy, science, and innovation to explore pathways towards more efficient, resilient, and climate-compatible nitrogen management systems. So it's now my great honor to invite Professor Mark Sutton to deliver the opening remarks. Professor Sutton is a co-chair of the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, the Director of International Nitrogen Management Systems, the Director of South Asian Nitrogen Hub, which was a project funded by the UKRI, and the main organizer of the webinar, and a globally recognized leader in nitrogen science and policy. So his contributions have been instrumental in shaping the international nitrogen agenda, including the International Nitrogen Assessment and the development of integrated approaches to nutrient management. Professor Sutton, we are grateful for your leadership in bringing this important dialogue together. The floor is yours. Professor Sutton, please.
Well, thank you so much, Tariq. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us across the world. And thank you for UNEP and team for making it happen. So nitrogen and nutrients, they connect together. Nitrogen being one of the most significant plant nutrients, the most expensive one for farmers to get into their system often. We're not forgetting phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, but there are special challenges for nitrogen, and that should become clear as we go through this webinar. The Global Partnership on Nutrient Management is a multi-stakeholder process, including academics, countries, businesses, civil society, looking to build cooperation on the nutrient challenge, where nitrogen is a big theme. I would say that we still have to push the case harder for why the world needs to care about nitrogen nutrients. We should have it on our newspapers every day, another nitrogen story. And indeed, we face at the moment a global nitrogen crisis. And I don't just mean the fertilizer crisis at the moment, I mean a crisis of systemic change of the world's nitrogen cycle, where we're taking lots of reactive nitrogen, using it, but also wasting a huge amount, changing our planetary system through the whole cascade of nitrogen: air pollution, water pollution, biodiversity, human health impacts, and of course, an economic waste of resources. The International Nitrogen Initiative has been working on this challenge for more than 20 years and working in partnership with the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management. And we do need to go further. We need to raise awareness. So I'm really happy that this webinar is here to provide input on the European situation. But let's not forget the specific fertilizer crisis we face at the moment. And I think perhaps the world is finally waking up. Of course, we all know about the war in Iran, the blockage of fertilizer supply, being able to get out of the Gulf of Hormuz, leading to a reduction of production of fertilizers, increases in price, which are different in different parts of the world. So I've just come back from missions on behalf of the Clean and Healthy Oceans program of the Global Environment Facility, where there are 13 new projects starting. And I've been in the Maldives to launch that Maldivian project for Clean and Healthy Ocean for nutrients, and in Sri Lanka, where FAO are leading that project and UNEP is leading the Maldives project. Talking to stakeholders there, they are really struggling to get fertilizers into the system and scratching their heads about how to handle increased prices, scratching their heads as how to transition really fast in such a crisis. And indeed, part of the problem is that it takes a while to build the training expertise that farmers and others need to invest in more circular systems. So much of our advice is what you need to be doing now to be more resilient at the next time another fertilizer crisis comes. Obviously, transitioning from a huge dependence on global systems and geopolitical risks to more local supply, more circular systems. So we'll hear more about that in the webinar. Coming to Europe, I've also just been this week in Geneva, where the United Nations Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, the Air Convention, has been negotiating its revision of the Gothenburg Protocol. The focus is on reducing emissions to air, nitrogen oxides, and ammonia. And there's a new guidance document being developed. We'll hear more about that ammonia guidance document in this webinar, as well as a mandatory annex of actions where countries, parties to that convention, are committed to reduce ammonia emissions. The big debate this week has been, will the countries go further in taking stronger action, or will actually they backtrack and weaken and even potentially remove those mandatory annexes? That is a big challenge, and obviously as a science community we need to present the opportunities for why the economics mean reducing emissions means more resilient farming. And there's an odd juxtaposition because within the last week or so, I understand that the European Commission has published its fertilizer action plan. I'm not sure it's on the agenda today, but I would certainly love to hear some comments about it if people are willing to do so. And in a quick read of this fertilizer action plan, which is an emergency response to the problems of the Gulf of Hormuz, and the shortage of fertilizer, the high price, I see lots of measures to support farmers, to increase fertilizer supply, to train. What I did not see is anything about reducing losses to air and to water, because if we reduce losses to air and to water, it means we're saving nitrogen. In a sense, we're struggling to get nitrogen in from other parts of the world, but we have lots under our nose. And that which is under our nose is the stuff that's evaporating, and even we can smell the emissions. So there's two parallel universes exemplified there. The Air Convention, the Fertilizer Action Plan, one of them looking to mobilize fertilizers and ignoring environmental losses, and the other one focusing on reducing environmental losses, but perhaps being disconnected. So that's the challenge, I think, is to bring these different worlds together. So coming then to Europe and the guys here online, the science community, stakeholders and others, work in nitrogen in Europe has been going on for some time. This is not a new field. So some of us started a cooperation in 2005, 2006 with the European Nitrogen Assessment, and I see some of the authors online. That was published in 2011, so 15 years ago already. And that work has been followed up by the International Nitrogen Assessment, in which there is a chapter for every world region, including a chapter from Western Europe and a chapter from Eastern Europe. That has taken a long time to bring to fruition. It's been tough, but I'm happy to say that the book itself is all complete. And the last 6 months have been spending doing very exciting things like figure permissions and contracting. And the world of publishing has become much more complicated than it ever was in the past. But that has been now submitted to Cambridge University Press. Now they will be processing that, and we can see it published, I think, in January or February, actually, on the tables. I'm already being chased by many journalists for our messages from the International Nitrogen Assessment. That's great. It shows that the world is gaining recognition of the need to address these issues and that they want to talk about it. And I think as we go through the messages you're sharing today from the different projects that you're involved with, we'll be seeing many of these themes returning. So back to let's say, the fertilizer crisis, the nitrogen crisis. I would say we have a juxtaposition between a short term and a long term. What do we do right now? How do we transition for increased circularity, reduced pollution, increased resilience? Those seem to be the buzzwords to me. And with that general remarks, I very much look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Sutton, for that powerful and visionary opening, discussing about fertilizer challenges, the challenges and opportunities of sustainable nitrogen management, and the efforts from Europe and other member states. We really appreciate your efforts in this regard, particularly. You have reminded us that nitrogen is not just a technical issue, it is essential to how we produce food, manage ecosystem. So to build this on a global framing, we now turn to European perspective, where science, policy, and practical intersect is highly dynamic ways. So it's now my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Luis La Saleta. He's Regional Director for Europe of the International Nitrogen Initiative and Associate Professor at Universitat Policía de Madrid, Spain. So Luis will introduce the objectives of this webinar and moderate the session onward. Luis, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I'm sharing at the screen.
Yes, we can hear.
Wait a second, please. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Tariq, for the introduction. Thank you to the Global Partnership of Nutrient Management from UNIP and the International Nitrogen Initiative for organizing these webinars, this series of webinars across different continents of the world. Today we are talking about Europe. Mark has introduced it very well where we are. Europe particularly is in a crossroad, and many problems and many challenges are in an intersection concerning food security, food production, livestock, croplands, consumption, environmental quality, and everything together in an environment of high political instability. I'm trying to summarize the challenges that we have representing the nitrogen cycle in the agro-food system by this way of representation that probably some of you know, called graphs, general representation of agro-food system. This is a representation of Europe between 2014 and 2019. Here you can see the different compartments, the grassland, cropland, livestock, and population, and how they are interconnected by means of nitrogen flows. Which is activating the most important activator, fueling the system, the most important new input of nitrogen into the system. Yes, it is synthetic fertilizer, 10 teragrams entering this. Europe is a bit more than European Union. This, you can find it in the paper, the description of the countries. First challenge is this triple shock concerning the fertilizer prices that we are reading every day in the news. First of all, of course, the Iran's war and the Hormuz Strait crisis, that even if Europe is not an importer or much importer of fertilizer coming from there, at least several countries, but this crisis is producing a spillover effect in the prices of fertilizer all over the world. There is also new sanctions to Russia, new tariffs, not for ammonia, but for the rest of fertilizers that are producing and increasing the prices of other fertilizer and reduction of the availability. And now China, that is also an important exporter to Europe, is giving more preference to domestic use. Therefore, we have this crisis in the input, in the prices, and once this nitrogen is entering the croplands together with other inputs such as manure, depositions, symbiotic fixation, this is transformed into crops, but part of it is, as we know very well, emitted to the air, to the water bodies, producing pollution of air and water, as we know very well. Concerning again to the inputs, this new nitrogen entering the European Union, even if Europe is a net export of many products, when talking about nitrogen, Europe is a net importer. Why? Because it's a net importer of nitrogen embedded in products that are rich in nitrogen, such as soybeans, also maize. And as you can see, this arrow between croplands and livestock, from the feed that ingestion in livestock production systems, about 30% is coming from abroad. This nitrogen is transformed into animal products, but part of it is excreted, part of it is recirculated. And we will see later in a better or worst way in the cropping systems or grassland system, but part of it is emitted in the form of ammonia, producing problems in biodiversity, health problems for the people. Everything and all this context is complicated by the geopolitical instability, the difficult to improve or to introduce or to accept different policies, in addition of the shortage, risk of more shortage, price increases, and this is a bit the context that we have in Europe. But we are talking, and Mark also talked, there are a lot of nitrogen circulating, but the question is this properly circulating? This is not a good scale to understand if the nitrogen that is in Europe is well circulated. You can see in this map of Europe how regions of Europe can be separated into net exporters and net importers. Net importers of feed, net exporters of grain, for example. And if we zoom in these regions, we can see regions that are net exporters of food and feed that are fueled constantly by the new need of synthetic fertilization, while other regions are fueled that are specialized in livestock production, are fueled by the net import of feed that finally is transformed into large amounts of manure that, because in some regions there are not enough crop to properly recirculate this manure, finally this, even if the system could be very efficient at the livestock or cropland scale, when we analyze the system at the agricultural system scale, probably they can be more linear and can result in nitrogen waste. Therefore, we are not using well, we are not recirculated well the nitrogen in European systems. We can see this linear system like livestock, or stock-like specialized systems, also linear in cropping system. Therefore, another question is, how are we using the large amount of nitrogen that is circulating in Europe? With all this in mind, we are proposing this webinar, trying to give some responses to open questions, to show solutions, to debate about all these different questions that we have now. And we will start with a presentation by Bruna Grisetti from the European Commission, talking about how these European policies are affecting the nutrient loads to the rivers and to the river basins. Then we will move to the ammonia emissions, and Johanna Pedersen and Alberto Sanzcoveña, both of them from the Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen, they will talk about strategies to reduce or to abate ammonia emissions. Then Josette Garnier from CNRS is talking about alternative scenarios that could produce enough food in a context of large scarcity. Then we move to Joao Serra from UNIP, European Nitrogen Expert Panel, that will talk about nitrogen use efficiency, cropping system, which is the proper scale, which have been the most important changes in different regions of Europe. Then let's talk about the hot topic of these days, the shortage of synthetic fertilizer, the rise of the prices, and how this can shock and could have an effect on food security. And finally, we will close with Basiliki Barou from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, and she will present some solutions, how innovation is dealing with many of these challenges, and particularly in South Europe, in the Mediterranean region, where the problem is not only nitrogen, too much nitrogen polluting scarce water, but also the scarcity of the water. And this project that she's going to present is trying to put in solutions, giving some innovations to face climate change, nitrogen crisis, and water crisis. And with all this, I am closing now, and I am giving the floor to Bruna Grisetti. Bruna Grisetti, she's a senior interesting presentation. We can see how European policies can improve the quality of the water, but maybe it's not enough, and we still need to be working, and we are here trying to reflect and to progress. And I invite to everyone to write questions in the Q&A chat, please, and we'll have a short debate at the end of the presentation, but not between the presentations. Now we need to move to the next presenter. Thank you, Bruna, again. And yeah, I am introducing to Alberto Sanzcoveña and Johanna Pedersen. Alberto Sanzcoveña is full professor at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. He is the co-lead author of the document of the Task Force of Reactive Nitrogen, a guidance document to abate ammonia emissions, together with Johanna Pedersen, that is a contributing author to this document. He's also the lead author of the IPCC chapter in another gases such as ammonia. And Johanna Pedersen, she's a researcher at Universidad Aarhus, Department of Livestock. She's an expert on measuring ammonia emissions. As we saw before, ammonia emissions is something that we need to tackle concerning to nitrogen cycle in Europe. And they are here to present some results on this aspect. You have 20 minutes, and I didn't say before, but when you are about 3 minutes to the end, I will let you know. And please, when you want, you can start. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Can you hear me? And the presentation yes. Can be also seen full screen. Great. Double check. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers of this great and interesting webinar for inviting me to present. I will show it in a bit, but just a clarification. Johanna and myself are both members of the editorial team of the guidance document on ammonia abatement of the UNECE. Just that to clarify. And we will share our time. I will do my best to, according to what we agreed yesterday, to leave Johanna, 2/3 of the time. I will start, although it has been already mentioned, the importance of ammonia. I would like to show this very nice illustration because I love it the the figure itself, and because it clearly illustrates the importance of ammonia within the nitrogen cascade as one of the main pathways of reactive nitrogen being lost from the agrofood system itself, and playing an important role in several key impacts affecting us. The question is if this is a serious issue in the European Union, and the answer, of course, is yes. Ammonia is among the atmospheric pollutants that are needed to be abated, is the one that is showing the smallest decrease along the time in the abatement. So there are serious problems, and the European Union, and we will see later that is something that is happening worldwide. Ammonia is an environmental and an atmospheric pollutant that is hardly abated. In Europe, the situation is, as you can see from this report of the European Environmental Agency, there are an important number of countries, member states, that are still pending of decreasing emissions in the 2030 horizon. So there is a need of abating ammonia losses in Europe, but also in the world. So this is coming from a 2022 PNAS really nice paper showing the most important sources and hotspots of ammonia in the world, both from croplands and livestock systems, which are the main sources of this gas, as you probably know. And in Europe, as said, there is not a decreasing trend at all. So there is a need of designing and implementing effective abatement practices at the European level. So Mark already framed all this, but as ammonia is a transboundary atmospheric pollutant, it has been it is controlled in the Convention of Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, and in which the Gothenburg Protocol, already mentioned by Mark, is the key protocol to abate these atmospheric transboundary air pollutants. And within this protocol, that, as Mark mentioned earlier, it's in a revision stage. So there is this Annex 9 in which the measures for the control of ammonia emissions are included. And among the tools that the parties have to abate these ammonia emissions, there is this guidance document that was published in 2014, so more than 10 years ago, and that is being revised now, as I will show you in the next slide. This is just to show in a ugly slide, very busy, the content of the guidance document, just to point out that maybe not all, but most of the ammonia abatement measures concerned to the different sources of emissions are included, and in the guidance document. So you can see, so that there are tables like those shown in the slide, showing the effectiveness of these measures in ranges, of course, because it's difficult to get a unique figure for the abatement of related to any measure, and also showing which is the reference technique used as a reference. As I said, now we are revising the document. We started already 2 years ago, and the draft is almost ready. Actually, it is uploaded. It was uploaded on the website for this 64th session of the Working Group on Strategies and Review of the UNECE Air Convention. Mark was there in Geneva quite recently. And we are now receiving comments from the different European Union member states, actually. And basically, well, we are a very nice editorial team among the people there. You can see who is there, but Johanna Pedersen, who will take the floor in a couple of minutes. It's part of the editorial team, but of course we are trying to coordinate, doing our best to coordinate this revision, but it could not be possible to do it without these more than 40 experts in the different fields of refer to the different sources of ammonia emissions that are working in kind for this revision. So differently, so as the main differences from the previous guidance document are, well, basically we have kept the mostly the different chapters refer to the different sources, as I said, but in this case we have included a system approach chapter in this with a unique chapter devoted to this system approach to the abatement of ammonia. And there is also an appendix including a very, very nice appendix devoted to show the main methods for ammonia measurement and quality criteria. And this links with the second part of my presentation, which is going to last 30 seconds, which is referred to quantification of ammonia emissions, something that we are doing in the framework of the research national project that Luis and I are co-coordinating these days, in close collaboration with Aarhus University, actually with the team of Johanna and Jasper, in which we are quantifying and comparing through several intercomparison campaigns, different techniques to measure, to quantify on-site ammonia losses as a key step to then abate those losses, and also taking into account different techniques to apply in this case, the liquid manure, both in Spain and Denmark, and under contrasting conditions of summer and winter. The work is ongoing, and it's nice to have this type of international collaboration with such a nice and expert team as that of the University of Aarhus. And just a picture of the field experiment we already ran in November last year at Follum in Denmark. And that's all. So thank you very much. And I just pass the floor to Johanna.
Thank you very much, Alberto and Luis, for the introduction. I trust that you see my presentation in presentation mode. Otherwise, please let me know.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Yes. So as Alberto already introduced, I would like to introduce the update of Chapter 7 in this ammonia guidance document as an example of how we dealt with this update and the process for the update. First of all, it's very important to mention that we were very lucky to have a really well-developed starting point. So the Chapter 7 from the previous guidance document was really well done, and there was some good assessment of the abatement efficiencies. And most importantly for us as a starting point, they did a very extensive supporting literature review that was actually made available online, along with the abatement efficiencies and the reduction percentages that were included in the chapter. So that really helped us, as that was our stepping stone. So I just want to acknowledge the authors of this version. Furthermore, we have been free lead authors of this update of Chapter 7, myself and David Pelster from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and Sascha Hafner, who's also from Aarhus University. Besides the three of us, we had a big group of contributing authors who have all really made valuable contributions, and also other additional stakeholders who have provided feedback and input and contributions. So thank you to all of those. The process itself has been open and kind of iterative. We started with the text and the data we had from the previous versions, and then tried to find out what do we know of new knowledge now, or do we have additional data we can include to update some of the ammonia reduction efficiencies. So we had several meetings and feedback rounds and an open dialogue throughout. This is the process. I will not go through all of the steps, but this is just to illustrate that it has been ongoing for a long time. We had several meetings. That's what you see on top of the arrow. And we started in 2023. And as Alberto said, we hope that we can have a final version published in 2027. Below the arrow, you see various text rounds, so to speak, where we had the text out for all co-authors for commenting, and we asked for additional data. For some of the topics, we had small working groups working intensely with some of the text just to make sure that we reached a good consensus. So the cornerstone of this update and these abatement efficiencies is really the data, the science behind the efficiencies. So as I already mentioned, from the 2014 version, we had a great start with this literature review. So of course, we wanted to build on top of that. We did that by making a literature search with all literature from 2012 until today. And that we made into a database that's publicly available and online. Then we combine the old data from the 2014 version and this new data. We also include some modeling with the ALFAM2 model that can be used to estimate ammonia emissions after field application of manure. And this was included as a mean to compare a relatively advanced model with literature data. We know that there's more models out there, so this is not to say that this is the only model that can be used. All data and calculations and modeling scripts are publicly available through GitHub, and we used R as a programming source in order, as that's also an open source software, so everything is available. A very important thing to establish when we talk about abatement efficiencies is a reference. For application of slurry and solid manure, we have broadcast as a reference. That's the same as in the 2014 version to keep consistency. In some countries today, broadcasting of slurry is illegal. That means that some of the newer literature doesn't include this as a treatment, so we could actually not use that to look at abatement efficiencies. However, these studies were included in the database as they were very for an overall assessment of the different technologies and also validation of effect sizes. So overall, we worked with 4 types of data. For some technologies, we didn't have any new data since the 2014 version, so this was just transferred directly to this updated chapter. Then we have some technologies where we have newer data, so where we did this combination. And then we have some categories, some new technologies that we assessed as a category 1. So that means that it has been well researched and documented that it will reduce emissions after field application. So here we did a literature review, of course, also going further back than 2012, as this was not included in the first version. And then we had the ALFAM2 model calculations. I will just give a brief example of 2 of the new technologies or techniques that has been included. One is application of acidified slurry. As you can see in the right top, a lot of the studies dealing with this are newer than 2012. So before it was not a category 1, which it is now. The plot shows all the data observations from the literature, where we have the emission reduction on the y-axis after acidification, and the change in pH on the x-axis. So we see a clear dose response effect here. Another new category that was included is dilution of slurry. Here we have a little less literature, but we have 4 studies that investigated this as a field scale and several other studies that investigated it in the lab scale. And we see that if we add water to the slurry before application, we can also reduce emissions. It's important to say that some of these techniques also can have some negative side effects, and you cannot use all of them in all cases. For example, dilution, you need to ensure that there's a good infiltration of the slurry when you apply it. So just an overview here of all the category 1 measures we have. So these are the well-researched techniques that can be used to reduce emissions after slurry application. We have a total of 12 techniques here. And the 4 where we have an arrow are new ones compared to the previous versions. So this is really great because it shows that ongoing research make it available to include new techniques. There's not one shoe that fits all, but here we have a lot of shoes. So we increase the chance that there will be a technique that's suitable for the situation out in the field, as it's very important to assess whether you have growing crops or a bare soil before you select which technique to use. We also have some techniques for solid manure. This is more simply, we need to incorporate it as fast as possible. And all of these reductions are taken directly from the former version, as there has not been any new research since this. So I will wrap up to not go too much over time. I think the key here is that we have a lot of options to reduce ammonia emissions after field application. So we can find something that fits for almost all scenarios. This is a great benefit for the farmer that can either increase the nitrogen availability for the crops or save on mineral fertilizer input, and also, of course, to the environment as we reduce the ammonia emissions. Some of the techniques need investments that can be quite large, but some of them are also relatively cheap to implement, and there can be a cost effectiveness in regards to saving on the mineral fertilizer that is very important. As a last note, we have also some techniques that we categorize as category 2 or 3. These are techniques that has been proven to work, but the research is still inadequate in order to have it as a category 1. But maybe this can inspire for further research so we have even more options for ammonia mitigations in the field in the future. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Alberto. I am eager to read the final document. And yeah, we are run out of time and we need to move to the next talk, Josette Garnier. I am introducing Josette Garnier. She's a emeritus director of research in CNRS and Sorbonne University. She has published an impressive amount of quality papers operating at different spatial scales from the plot to the global scale, system scale, including cropping system, crop and livestock, global agro-food systems. And I am happy that she's here today and she will talk about scenarios in this uncertain future. And please, Josette, when you want, the floor is yours. I can't hear you. Josette?
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Sorry. Okay. So thank you for the invitation. And I would like to show you how it is possible to reduce by half the environment pollution by nitrogen and by continuing to feed population in Europe. And as Mark said, when global energy supply becomes fragile, fertilizer trade is also very fragile, and the food production may become too rapidly if nothing change. In 2020, 22, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia was a very strong warning for the agricultural sector. Now the situation is even worse, I would say, to the existing agricultural system. So the future is very challenging and uncertain because it requires indeed very deep changes in agriculture. Agricultural system need to be more resilient, self-sufficient, and more rooted in soil and in society. So, okay, sorry, yeah. So how can we break this current trend characterized by intensification, specialization, pollution, and loss of biodiversity? For this, we think that we need integrative and quantitative modeling tools. And the graph approach can be used for this, and Luis already presented it. And it is not a model for only accounting the present fluxes, but it is also it can be also used for exploring scenario, and I will present to you two transformative scenario. I have to say that among many scenarios, I have selected these two one. And from the graph approach, we can also define indicator and that can help to stabilize also and to give insight on how we can do to reduce pollution. So, but a main question for this is to what extent are we willing to reduce our consumption, and we need also to accept a simpler lifestyle. So the graph approach, I will be very quick because Luis presented it. I would remind that we have four compartments, cropland and permanent cropland, permanent grassland, livestock, and population and its food consumption and diet. So, and it is in this sense, I would say it is integrative because it takes into account the population. And between these compartments, we have several flaxes. And of course, the big flax is input by fertilizer, but not only synthetic fertilizer, atmospheric deposition, synthetic fixation, etc. We take also into account the feed import and also the vegetal and animal product that can be imported or exported. This approach take also into account all the waste by soils, but also the waste by the population, and as already mentioned, losses through ammonia or N2. Yeah, and we have from this defined several indicators, and I will present two of them. And I will present the N import dependency of a territorial agro-food system. So this indicator is represents the amount of commercial N import as food, feed, and synthetic fertilizer required to provide food for people. So it means that at the numerator we have all these external input, and at the denominator we have the food ingested or the food exported. So this N dependency and import dependency, it's a way to approach self-sufficiency. And when this indicator is zero, it means that we are self-sufficient. Regarding N circularity, it is the share of the N recycling. So in green here, manure and atmospheric reduced deposition compared to the external input, so fertilizer, feed, and net import of vegetal and animal. So we have to say that agri-food system is one of the sector which for which the resource have high potential for circularity, and so it can be very interesting to use it. So now I will give you the main hypothesis for the construction of these two scenarios. It is a common approach to compare a scenario with a reference situation. And for the population, we have the population given by the statistics, and for the projection, it's the same. It's from European statistic. Regarding the utilized agricultural area, we can see that it is the same for the scenario of the reference as the agroecological one. But we have a reduction for the scenarios that we call a radical simplicity of lifestyle. And this reduction is linked to the increase of grassland, but it is also due to an increase of forest here, and it is also an increase of gardening and the system that we call synthropus. So with this increase, the agricultural cropland have to decrease. Regarding the diet, this change, because for the moment not only we use too much animal protein in our diet, but we use also too much proteins. So in the agroecological scenario, we reduce to 30% the animal protein in our diet, reducing also the total protein consumption. And in the radical simplicity of lifestyle, we reduce even more. So this agricultural system, which can be characterized now by open industrial with some organic farming niche, this is what it is called now, we go in our scenario to a generalization of organic mixing farming and using local fertility. And for the more radical scenario, we have more agroforestry and even more local fertility management. So in terms of metabolism, we can say that now it is linear with just some recycling and very intense and with efficacy, but it depends what we call with efficacy. And with agroecological scenario, it is more recycling, and we reduce the efficacy but we increase a lot simplicity. And for the radical simplicity way of life, it is based mainly on recycling and high simplicity. So you already see the result for the reference situation here. And we can now compare the agroecological scenario and the radical simplicity one. What is striking is the difference in the input of fertilization. Of course, here we have a large amount of synthetic fertilizer. And here, in these two scenarios, we have not anymore synthetic fertilizer. These scenarios are based on organic agriculture with long-term rotation and no external, no synthetic fertilization, only legume, which are the major input for nitrogen. Also, in our scenario here for the two, we have not feed import. No feed import, because livestock is sized to be fed on permanent grassland and cropland. For this scenario, of course, the net export of animal and vegetal products are reduced, but they still exist a bit. So the diet, I already told about the reduction in diet. And now if we can have a look at the losses, and mainly in terms of surplus, which is a proxy for leaching, we can see that we can reduce this leaching by more than half. And regarding wastewater, what we do with the scenario is recycling of wastewater losses to cropland, and it is by 25% in the agroecological scenario, and it is 75% in the radical simplicity scenario. So here are the result in terms of dependency of food delivery on the import. And we can see that for the reference, we have an average of 2.5. That means that we need, in average, 2.5 kilogram nitrogen to produce 1 kilogram nitrogen of food. But we can notice that for some country or some region, it can go up to 5. For the agroecology, we have, in average for Europe, we have self-sufficiency, zero dependency, but of course we can have some exchange between regions. And for the radical simplicity, we are self-sufficiency almost everywhere, or everywhere, it depends. Yes, everywhere.
Hi, Josette, I'm afraid we need to move on.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. For circularity, okay, it's the same. We have an increase in circularity for the agroecology, but not really for radical simplicity, and we can come back for it. Regarding the environmental impact, we can see that we reduce a lot for half of the pollution for the agroecology scenario, and even more for the radical simplicity scenario. So I am here at the conclusion, and so you can read it, but I would not like to go through my time, but I would like to say that it is not autarky that is requested in this scenario, which are not prescriptive. It's just a way to put this scenario on discussion and to explore the gradient between these two possible scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josette, for sharing these challenging scenarios. Yeah, I'm afraid we need to jump to the next speaker, and it's Joao Serra. Joao, are you there?
Okay.
Yeah, I am introducing Joao Serra.
Yes,
He's a member of the European Nitrogen Expert Panel. He's also a researcher in Landcraft in Aarhus University, and he's here to talk about nitrogen use efficiency in European cropping systems. Please, Joao, go ahead.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you for challenging me to provide an overview and an update of the European Union Nitrogen Expert Panel. I assume you can see my full screen presentation nicely, so I'll move on. And so I'll start by providing a quick overview of UNEP. It's been some years since UNEP was created, and we are essentially a group combining scientists, officials from the European Commission, and also representatives of the fertilizer industry and farmers' associations. Our goal in UNEP is to contribute knowledge to nitrogen management in Europe and provide and recommend potential pathways for change. Again, the idea here is not to create new knowledge necessarily, but it's to link the needs and demands that the different stakeholders have in better managing the nitrogen in Europe. So to provide just again the key milestones that UNEP has had in the past, and in around 2015-16, UNEP has released a very important document, a guidance document for assessing nitrogen use efficiency at the farm level. In this document, it was postulated the existence of a safe operating space, whereby you can define a minimum desirable productivity for cropping systems or the farm level, and also a desired maximum nitrogen surplus. And between these, we are constrained by the nitrogen use efficiency, which it was stipulated that it should be around 50 and 90%. Again, I think it's important to highlight how these values are prescriptive and crop specific, and they are not necessarily mandatory, and they are very nuanced. I think that's an important keystone that we are accounting for the kickstart again of UNEP. And some years after, Miguel Quemada, also a member, has done a very interesting analysis of different arable and livestock farms across Europe, applying this approach as well. And you can see here the comparison between Denmark, Germany, and Spain, and Spanish arable farms. And Miguel found marked differences between different farms across different countries and different pedoclimatic conditions. However, what initially started, I would say, as a farm level assessment, has grown up, probably exploded a bit, particularly in the scientific community, where NUE, nitrogen use efficiency, has been used very much freely, perhaps because it's a very simple way to get a sense of how efficient we are. But as well as an increased scientific uptake, it also has increased its policy relevance. So now interpretations became more important. We need to be a bit more sure on how to assess and interpret nitrogen use efficiency across different scales and cropping systems. However, for its simplicity, it's also a very nuanced indicator. It's also a very nuanced. We have to be mindful of how we interpret the nitrogen use efficiency in governance, where the implications are higher have a higher stake. And I would like just to highlight here how the farm NUE, crop NUE, regional NUE, and national NUE are not the same. So therefore, we have to be mindful of the system boundaries that we use to compare. We cannot compare the efficiency of maize with the efficiency of olive groves, for instance. And this, with the new release of UNEP, roughly around 1.5 years, we have established a vision. So within more or less 3 macro topics. First, we'd like to explore the relationships with greenhouse gas emissions, along with the nitrogen use efficiency, by gathering empirical evidence. We want to guide as well the usage of this indicator across different spatial scales, ensuring that we are giving it a proper use. And more importantly, we want to move forward with crop-specific NUE and nitrogen balances, because it's probably one of the most meaningful targets, and we still are tackling many data gaps. So I'll start with the coherence across scales, because I think I would like to take this opportunity to perhaps shed some light to some of you that may use this at different scales. And I would like to start with the field scale, which is where the management signal is strongest, right? Because we have crop rotations, we know how much farmers are applying to their field operations. But as we move towards bigger scales, the signal between NUE and management gets diluted, right? So when we enter the catchment scale or the landscape scale, we start to have the effect of different soil properties, of topography, of hydrologic conditions, likewise for regions. And when we enter the country scale or even the whole world, then we get a signal of crop mix, right? The share of different similar crops in the landscape. And we also start to feel the effects of policy or market-driven diversification. So this is just to establish an example, right? This is the stereotypical NUE trajectory for a given country, and we can see two contrasting trajectories, one improving and then another one declining. I think the status quo here would be to say, okay, if we are improving, that means that we are managing our nitrogen more efficiently. However, UNEP wants to showcase the nuance that it's not necessarily about how we are managing our crops, but what kind of crops we are growing, right? Because again, if we are growing a cereal, typically it has a much higher nitrogen use efficiency than a vineyard or a permanent crop or fruits. So we do have to be mindful of that. However, it's relatively tricky to disentangle these effects in a simple and elegant way. So what we have done in some preliminary fashion is that we have tried to isolate the effects of management and cropping mix, what kind of crops are growing in the countries, and more importantly, how that affects the nitrogen efficiency. I didn't put the values because it's still preliminary, but here you get a sense of how much crop mix affects NUE, right? And we can see a clear demarcation between Western Europe, where the cropland trajectories are more matured, particularly since the early start of the European Union. And we can see Eastern Europe where countries are still entering Europe or have done so in a few years ago, and are now starting to comply with European legislation, and so are entering or already have entered a new food system transition. So therefore, we cannot meaningfully compare Western European countries with Eastern European countries or countries with very different cropping systems. And again, more importantly, we also want to move towards crop-specific nitrogen balances. And here in the right, you can see a forthcoming paper by Hans van Grinsven, and also Luis is also involved, again, with other colleagues, where they have developed or still are developing crop-specific NUE and nitrogen balances for different countries in Europe for the last 6 years. However, we still have to make sure these estimates reflect the field conditions, right? So our idea in UNEP is then to benchmark, to evaluate, to verify these estimates against field observations. Now to end, again, this is just a take-home message. Use NUE, but not alone. It's a partial KPI, it's a partial performance indicator. So therefore, we need to couple NUE with other losses, such as greenhouse gas emissions, leaching, or surplus. We have to be very mindful of the different systems, different crop rotations, whenever we compare them using NUE. So therefore, we have to benchmark their performance against similar systems. And again, we have to distinguish between management from food system transitions. So therefore, we need to adjust these biases in the NUE whenever we calculate them at larger spatial scales. And that's for it. That's pretty much it. I'll keep you updated with UNEP information as we develop it. Thank you for hearing me, and if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or to ask them in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joao, for giving us an update of the work you are doing at UNEP. We'll have questions at the end, and we need to move forward now. And let me introduce you Peter Alexander. He's professor and chair of the Global Food System and is the head of the Global Change Research Institute in the School of Geosciences in the University of Edinburgh. He's part of IPBES, IPCC, and he published a very, very nice paper some years ago in 2023, I think, about the effect of the Ukrainian war in the fertilizer prices, in the food security, and I think he's a privileged vision to understand the problems we are handling now. And please, Peter, if you want, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Luis. Yeah, so that's basically, I'm going to be talking through that paper, which is why you've got the Nature Food front page on this slide today, very briefly, and sort of also obviously trying to relate it to what's going on about the Strait of Hormuz and the conflict in Iran. but I don't have results specifically to show on that. Um, so I guess just as a very slightly uniquely for today, I suppose, we're zooming kind of right out to think about the whole food system. So we're thinking about farmers and fertilizer and so on. Yes, but we're also thinking about, how food is traded, processors, retailers, and consumers, and politicians as well. But what the impact of diet, which has slightly been talked about. Um, so this is the whole food system perspective we're trying to take. And obviously, there's a potential for shocks to occur in anywhere in that food system. So it could be an extreme weather event, or it could be tariff changes, or it could be conflict, war in a particular region, or lots of different things. So obviously, today we're really focusing on those kind of conflict-based shocks, specifically related to Ukraine and Iran. And this slide is really just to sort of highlight that there are some similarities and some differences between those two conflicts. So obviously in Ukraine, at least the sort of the media and policy focus to begin with, at least, was very much on sort of loss of exports from through the Black Sea and from from Ukraine and potentially from Russia as well. Although there was no, it was still possible for Russia to export, and there was no challenges, some challenges, but it was still possible. But so wheat accounted for 29% of globally exported wheat, so roughly 30%. So that makes a lot of sense that was a major concern. But obviously we had the other aspect, which is sort of through fertilizer, specifically nitrogen fertilizer, where that was also disrupted, and because of the link to natural gas, there was a huge rise in fertilizer prices, roughly a tripling of prices in sort of the year to May 2022, kind of during sort of the initial period of that war, as shown on this chart. Now that the sort of the Iran conflict doesn't have that same direct food role as an exporter to the global markets, but obviously it's an even more important, arguably, role in terms of fertilizer, with some third of urea that's traded internationally passing through the Strait. And again, we're seeing huge the sort of rapid rise in prices, again, as shown on that chart on the left. So the question then becomes, well, okay, so we're seeing lots of different types of shock, or the shock sort of mediated and cascading in different ways in terms of things like disruption to food trade, disruption to or increases in fertilizer prices and energy prices and transport costs. And that kind of gets kind of cascades through the food system in lots of different ways. Farmers might choose different crops to establish, different levels of fertilizer to apply. That would have consequences for food prices, which would in turn have consequences for what people choose to consume, to diets, and then there are nutritional and health outcomes as a result of that. And it would be obviously really nice to understand how those things relate. How do different parts of those drivers generate different outcomes, as kind of categorized here. And even if we had really good data, that's really not something we can do in the real world. This is something that sort of model simulations can try and unpick, because if we have a simulated environment, we can change different things, and we can then look at the outcomes that arise from that, and draw some sort of conclusions. So that's basically what the paper that Luis mentioned did, related specifically to the Ukraine situation. And what we did there is we took a sort of a factorial sort of experiment approach, where there were four scenarios. So as sort of depicted here on the right hand side, as sort of no shock, kind of counterfactual, where there wasn't this invasion and prices more or less stayed steady in terms of input costs, agricultural inputs. And then sort of moving to along the x-axis, if you like, to the right, we kind of had a curtailment of exports from Russia and Ukraine, potentially a cessation of those exports in some of those scenarios. And then sort of moving up, we had a higher fertilizer and energy price set of scenarios. So the sort of the combined energy, fertilizer, and export shock one on the sort of the top right. And the increase in energy costs was perhaps maybe a little bit on the high side in retrospect. So we looked at sort of a tripling of fertilizer costs, and we kind of kept that higher level indefinitely as we ran it out into the future. So those were the scenarios when they were designed about May 2022. And then that's run through this existing model that we've developed over a large number of years. I don't have much time, so I'm not going to talk to it in great detail, but I just want to highlight a couple of things that are included in the model. We have sort of a crop vegetation dynamics component, which looks at explicitly how nitrogen fertilizer and irrigation rates impact crop growth, and this is done spatially under different climate scenarios, if and when that's relevant, with the soil conditions kind of dynamically updated through time as well. So then that generates sort of yield potential, so the farmers can decide what level of fertilizer to use based on that simulation. So that's the sort of the land use decision component, the farmers making those choices about what to do, what crops to establish, where, and how much, what level of management intensity to use. And then we have demand. We have consumers choosing based on the prices of commodities to what they're going to, and incomes and preferences and so forth, what they're going to eat. And then sort of international trade, looking at what's imported and exported from different countries for different commodities. So that all kind of works endogenously within the model. Yeah, and if we are prescribing some sort of shock, then that would happen over the top using SSPs and RCPs, if you know what they are, but if you don't worry. So then this is moving on to talk through some of the results of those Ukraine scenarios. So this is the combined energy and sort of curtailment of exports from Russia and Ukraine, and the higher fertilizer prices. And as one might expect, higher nitrogen fertilizer price ends up with farmers choosing to fertilize less in general. We have, but some substitution for other inputs. Agricultural area expands in some locations. There's a slightly more mixed picture, but in general more irrigation applied, and sort of management intensity, which is pesticides and mechanization and other things, which is our sort of third form of intensity in the model. And as a consequence of all of these things happening, we also see kind of changes in food commodity prices. So this is kind of like a global market price. We have countries with specific market prices as well, but this is kind of the global average market price, if you like, tariff-free price. So this is looking at each of those four shock scenario, or the three shock scenarios against the fourth no shock scenario in each case. And the sort of restricting exports from Russia and Ukraine increases prices, but not, at least on this scale, by a very dramatic amount, maybe 10%, maybe a bit less, depending on the commodity. But whereas the two scenarios where fertilizer prices are shocked, this sort of tripling, then we get a very substantial increase in price. Here we're talking, with just energy fertilizer price increases, we're talking about a price change of something close to doubling. Less for some commodities, but that order, and even a little bit higher for the sort of combined curtailment of exports plus higher fertilizer prices. And this is occurring kind of at the same time in the model, but that will all have an impact on food consumption, what people can afford or people choose to eat. Sorry, that's the next slide. This one's expressing the change in price as a little Spurs index, which is basically a constant basket of food. So what's the diet is fixed effectively in the index, and it's suggesting that under that combined scenario, prices increased by about 80% over the 2 year period, which is roughly an annual increase of some 35%, which is obviously pretty dramatic. And yeah, this is where the sort of the dietary shift comes in. So because people have chosen to eat different foods, we can then associate those different diets. This is constant preferences and constant incomes, in fact, but it's the only thing that's changing is the food prices here. Um, because people choose to eat different foods, then that has a consequence for nutritional health. So we have changing rates of underweight, overweight, and obese, which has health consequences. But we also have changes towards, if you like, staple commodities, cereals and starchy roots and things like that, and away from fresh fruit and veg, and also away from red meat. Less red meat is actually beneficial to health in general, but lower fruit and veg is bad, and obviously being bit more a higher percentage of people being underweight clearly has a negative health implications, but less overweight people has positive health implications. So we have both aspects, kind of fewer deaths because of some of those things, and more deaths for other reasons. But unfortunately, particularly in regions, lower income regions such as sub-Saharan Africa, there's a big increase in underweight people, and therefore a greater number of deaths. And to sort of look at this in aggregate terms, we were suggesting that between 60 and 110 million additional people would become underweight, undernourished, and that would end up with something like 400,000 to a million of additional annual deaths globally, despite some of the protective aspects in terms of lower rates of obesity. Obviously, higher income regions tend to be like North America and Europe tend to be less affected. So I guess the question is, well, why this maybe sounds surprising, why is, maybe not, I don't know, it depends on the audience, but it's not necessarily what people would expect, that the sort of curtailment of exports isn't as big a deal as it might be, but otherwise appear to, you would expect it to be intuitively. And so to give a quick sort of justification of that, a lot of the focus tends to be about giving percentages as 30% of wheat is exported from Russia and Ukraine. Yes, that may be true in terms of export, but it's not true in terms of global supply. So the percentages given often ignore domestic consumption and production. So if we think about Russia and Ukraine as supplying the rest of the world for cereals, it's actually more like 3%, 3 or 4%. So it's not insignificant, but it's a lot less. Stocks are able to buffer, and also the substitution that's possible. Whereas higher input costs, higher nitrogen fertilizer cost is experienced globally, and there's much less opportunity for the system to adapt to that. So obviously what happened subsequently, as we probably all know, prices became sort of returned sort of 2023 to some more like normal levels. Actually, it had been stable for quite some years before that. Previous price was 2011, I think. But obviously the straits being closed and this disruption to fertilizer supply, as we know, is creating this large spike. Not quite as large as yet as the Ukraine one, but who knows what is to come. Very quickly, because I'm going to run out of time, probably have already, is, it's similar to what I was saying about food. I think there's some similar aspects where the significance of the straits is expressed in terms of the volume of international trade And actually, a lot of fertilizer is also produced and consumed in the same country. So it's probably fairer to think of Gulf supply being something like 10 or 12% of global nitrogen used, rather than sort of 30%, 35%. However, I think the direct sort of shortage of supply is actually not usually the main driver. It's much more about price exposure. So even if the fertilizer is being produced in the same country or in the same locality as you, if as a farmer, if that fertilizer is going to trade in line with global markets very largely, because they could be exported to global markets. Tariffs and transport costs have to be taken into account, but still, so you're experiencing maybe no shortage, but you're still experiencing that price increase, which is happening everywhere, and that is, in my view, the major driver. So we're doing some work equivalent, if you like, to the Ukraine work, but more focused on the Straits, where we're going to look at a sort of a recovery as well, and a doubling and a tripling. So a slightly different scenario set up. We don't have results for that yet. I'm still working on that. So yeah, final remarks. Yeah, both these are sort of obviously conflict-driven shocks, and they cascade through the food system, and that the consequences of that tend to be felt by the poor, the people in the lowest income in global society, because they're least able to afford the higher costs, and that could have very major health and nutritional outcomes, and in my view, that the direct focus on sort of shortages, which may be acute and important, therefore sort of tend to underplay the sort of the cost price mediated impacts that are much more systemic, and have a bigger kind of net outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I think it's extremely timely and an important talk. Let's see what is happening the next months with all of this. Yeah, we need really to move forward. And I'm giving the floor to the last speaker, is Vasiliki Baru. Are you there?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Yes, perfectly. Hi, Vasiliki. She's a postdoctoral researcher in Universidad Politécnica de Madrid in this project of Horizon Europe on nutrient and water management in Mediterranean systems. And she's giving a talk on innovation and science in this area of Europe. And please go ahead, Vasiliki.
Yes. Thank you, Luis, and thank you for the invitation. So today I will present solutions to confront climate change, and specifically I will talk about innovative results from the Horizon Europe Rains project. So to give a background, I will start by showing this figure from IPCC that compares past and future bioclimatic regions in Mediterranean, where we can clearly see that the Mediterranean is becoming hotter and drier, and specific regions, like in Spain and in Greece, are projected to have an arid or semi-arid climate by the end of the century. And what does this mean from the point of view of agriculture? Well, from a recent study in wheat production in Spain, we see that rain-fed crops show lower and more unstable yields compared to the irrigated systems, which achieve higher and more consistent production due to the reliable water availability. So as a result, farmers adjust their nitrogen fertilizer inputs in a different way in each system, and they generally apply higher and more controlled amounts in the irrigated conditions. So this means that the interaction between water and nitrogen strongly influences yield, and this highlights that coordinate management of both is essential to reduce nitrogen losses. So this next map shows that large areas, both from rain-fed and irrigated crops, are generating excess nitrogen from fertilizer use. When this excess nitrogen is lost through leaching, it can end up to the groundwater. And this is particularly concerning in Mediterranean regions where the nitrate leaching is high and the aquifers are already scarce and vulnerable. So this is where the RAISE project comes in. Its objective is to make European agriculture more resilient to water scarcity by proposing 10 innovative practices and technologies. 4 among them are focused on nutrient resilience. So the final aim of the project is to increase the efficiency of both water, reduce the impact of extreme climatic events on agriculture. The 10 solutions are demonstrated in 10 demo sites in 2 countries, in Spain and in Greece. And the solutions are being tested in 5 types of agriculture: agroecology, organic, conventional, intensive, and urban agricultural systems. So among these solutions, there are 3 new ways to save water, which are the solid water, the reclaimed wastewater, and the fog collectors. Regarding the plant nutrients, the project also proposes solutions for smarter fertilizers and healthier soil. One example is the use of sewage sludge, which is rich in nutrients and improves the soil water use. Another example is the biofertilizers from bio-waste, such as animal residues and algae that are being introduced in fertigation systems and help to use water and nutrient more efficiently. A third example of solution proposed by the project are the compost brick ladders that are made of agricultural residues, of compost and insect residues, and they are placed under the ground that help to prevent soil erosion, while at the same time provide nutrients to the plants. So all these solutions are currently tested in experimental plots, but how can we actually evaluate the efficiency of these solutions at large scale? Well, with a modeling tool, which is another solution of the project, that is designed to represent the whole agri-food system at the basin level. So not just individual fields, but the entire system. It tracks water, nitrogen, and phosphorus fluxes between crops, grasslands, livestock, and the human population, including also the losses to the environment. So what is really important is that it connects different scales from the crop level all the way up to the agri-food system level. And it allows us to better understand the overall impacts and trade-offs of these innovative solutions at large scale. So one of the key outputs of the modeling tool is that it gives us a complete picture of the basin in terms of nitrogen surplus under the baseline scenario, that is the current agricultural practices in each region. We can see here in the 2 maps the two areas that we're studying currently, which is the Segura Basin in Spain and the Axios sub-basin in Greece. And these maps allows us to identify where nitrogen is being overused and where potential environmental risks may occur. So once the experimental results from the RAIN's innovative solutions are available, we will be able to integrate them into the model and simulate their effects. In this way, we can upscale the benefits of the solutions and evaluate how much they can reduce the nitrogen surplus across the entire basin. So going beyond of the nitrogen in the cropping systems, the graphs approach, as previously mentioned by Josette and Luis, integrates the nitrogen that circulates not only the crops, but also in grasslands, livestock, and human population. And as I said before, after testing the RAIN solutions at plot level, the next step is to scale up these results and model them at the agri-food system. This will allow us to evaluate how nitrogen can be recovered and reused across the entire system. And to talk about specifically, we will assess how much nitrogen from livestock losses can be returned to crops through biofertilizers, how much nitrogen from wastewater can be recycled via sewage sludge, whether crop residues can be reused as compost bricks, how much of the nitrogen surplus can be recirculated through irrigation solutions, and ultimately how much synthetic fertilizer can be reduced through the combined effects of all these strategies. And to conclude, I would like to say that the sustainable nitrogen management is closely linked not only to water management, but also to the specific nitrogen flows that are recirculated within the entire agri-food system. So upscaling innovative solutions at the territory level, such as the basins, is essential for adopting new management strategies in an integrated way. And I would like to thank all the collaborators of the RAINS project and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Vasiliki. It's a great summary of the project RAINS and very interesting the transfer between science and innovation at the territorial level. And now we need to move to the questions. We almost don't have time, but I'm going to give the floor to Andrea Perez. Andrea Perez is a senior of international affairs manager in the NGO Compassion World Farming, and please, Andrea, you can lead the session of questions.
Thank you, Luis. I'm going to be really quick, and it is good that already many questions are being answered in the chat by the panelists. So perhaps I can pick a couple, and then we can move forward with the closing remarks. So I will pick this question. Sustainable nitrogen management faces several challenges, as we know, like water scarcity, over-reliance on chemical fertilizers, soil degradation, and weak monitoring systems. Given these challenges, how can we design and implement that data-driven nitrogen governance to improve nitrogen use efficiency? This question is specifically from a participant from Tunisia. I think this is a general question. It doesn't have a specific person to answer. I don't know if one of the panelists would like to address this question. It's basically a question on designing and implementing data-driven nitrogen governance to improve nitrogen use efficiency given all the challenges that we face.
Yes, I think this is the key question of all this talk. How can we implement a governance on nitrogen? And I invite some of the panelists. I think all of them have a good background to give a response, a difficult response, because it's
I can try to answer, but it's such a there's not an answer, right? I think there are pieces of an answer that we can provide, and I think with everything related, right, with governance, I think we need first evidence. Without evidence, we cannot suggest targeted policies, right? So my suggestion would be to first collect what's available and identify knowledge gaps and grow from there. But without that, I don't think we can be reasonable in developing good and long-lasting policies that actually can help the country towards achieving their national goals for food production and also for environmental management, which is it's something that we can seem so easy to say, and I know how difficult and challenging it is to do so in most countries, but I think that would be a start at least.
Yes, thank you very much, Joao. I know it is a general question. I'm picking a couple of general questions rather than a specific. for the panelists to contribute. And I think another general question that maybe it's important to highlight, because sometimes in these discussions we focus a lot on the production side, but not so much on the consumption side. So there's a specific question on potential reduction of livestock numbers. And of course, we know that this is a controversial subject, but I don't know if any of the panelists would like to answer. The question specifically is why don't we talk more about livestock numbers reduction in the EU?
Well, there's a few things I could say there. I mean, it is talked about a lot in the academic literature related to environmental issues, health issues, various other things. It's politically very challenging, however, when when that gets raised, it tends to be seen as too politically fraught. So yeah, but it's definitely a major lever for many beneficial outcomes, both health and environmental, and it's something that we need to talk about more, and we need to kind of convince the public and the politicians that this is something that they need to do things around. Um, uh, Sort of environmental externalities, a meat tax would go a long way to addressing this. I'll leave it
Thank
there.
you. Thank you, Peter. Bruna is raising her hand.
I'm sorry to stop the debate, but yeah, I'm afraid that we need to close this. It's a lot of information, great information, and challenging talks, and we need to close. I'm giving the floor to Stephanie van der Poel. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hello. She's a program officer at the source of sea pollution of UNEP. Yeah, and she's going to close the session, and please, when you want.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, on behalf of the UN Environment Programme and the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, I would like to sincerely thank all speakers, the moderator, organizers, and participants for today's rich and timely discussion on sustainable nitrogen management in Europe. Today's webinar has clearly demonstrated that nitrogen is not only an environmental issue, but also a food systems, climate, biodiversity, health, and economic resilience issue. The presentations highlighted both the progress Europe has made and the significant challenges that remain, from nutrient pollution and ammonia emissions to the growing vulnerabilities linked to geopolitical instability, fertilizer dependency, and climate change. We heard compelling evidence that integrated nitrogen management is essential for achieving multiple global commitments simultaneously, including the SDGs, climate objectives under the Paris Agreement, and pollution reduction targets. Importantly, we also saw that science policy collaboration in Europe continues to provide valuable lessons for other regions of the world. UNEP and the GPNM particularly welcome the emphasis placed today on cooperation across sectors and scales, linking researchers, policymakers, farmers, civil society, and international initiatives. Platforms such as the International Nitrogen Initiative, the Task Force on Reactive Nitrogen, and the European Nitrogen Experts Panel are critical examples of how knowledge sharing and coordination action can accelerate progress. The discussion also reminds us that resilience must now be central to nutrient management strategies. Improving nutrient efficiency, promoting circularity, reducing losses, and supporting sustainable food systems are not only environmental priorities, they are increasingly matters of economic and geopolitical stability. As we move forward, UNEP and the GPNM remain committed to supporting countries and partners in advancing sustainable nutrient management globally, including through the implementation of the UNEA resolutions on sustainable nitrogen management and related multilateral environmental processes. We hope today's exchange will inspire continued collaboration, innovation, and ambition across Europe and beyond. And finally, a big congratulations on the important progress made on the International Nitrogen Assessment. I do look forward to reading this. Thank you once again for your participation, and we look forward to continuing this important dialogue together. Thank you and have a very good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you to all the panelists, to Andrea, to Stephanie, and thank you to everyone. I think it has been a great session full of enlightenment talks, and there are many things to do, and I hope we will stay working together in the next years to progress on this direction. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye.